Hi, I'm your instructor, Dr. Dusty Columbia Emberry, and this lesson is part of a series addressing strategies for inclusion in the classroom. At this point, you've already been introduced to some of the ways that teachers introduce content to students and the foundation of assessment when it comes to students. So for today's micro PD, we're going to focus specifically on differentiated instruction. Now, before we go any further, I'd like you to click the pause button and then click that first link in the description. That's going to take you to a Google form for a pre-assessment so that you and I can get an idea of where you're starting from. Now that you've completed your pre-assessment, let's get started. In today's micro PD, we are addressing differentiated instruction. If you successfully complete the activities introduced today, by the end of today's micro PD, you will be able to do the following. You'll be able to identify and use vocabulary specific to the topic of differentiated instruction. You'll be able to explain in your own words the basic principles of differentiating content, process, and product. And you'll be able to identify one or more instructional strategies that support differentiated instruction. So what is differentiated instruction? Differentiated instruction is a teaching philosophy based on the premise that teachers should adapt instruction to the student's educational needs. Now, Carol Ann Tomlinson, who was really the first scholar who addressed differentiated instruction in a school context, and she continues to be the leading author on this topic, said this: "Rather than marching students through the curriculum lockstep, teachers should modify their instruction to meet students' varying readiness levels, preferences, and interests. Therefore, the teacher proactively plans a variety of ways to get it and express learning." So why differentiate? Well, click the pause button below and go to the first Padlet link. There, I'd like you to write down 3 reasons why teachers should differentiate. Thanks for your ideas on the Padlet. Some of the reasons that we need to differentiate in the classroom are because students come to our classrooms with a variety of prior educational experiences. They have lots of different interests, they have many different preferences, they have different personal experiences, motivation, and readiness levels, and that includes both academic and social-emotional readiness levels. So what does that mean for us as teachers? Well, it means that we need to adapt what we teach and how we teach in order to accommodate student learning needs. I'm thinking about readiness, interest, and previous knowledge. And we need to adapt how students can demonstrate what they've learned. So what is a differentiated instruction classroom? Carol Ann Tomlinson says that a differentiated classroom is a classroom where the teacher responds to the unique needs of students. So what can teachers differentiate? Well, 3 things. They can differentiate the content, the process, and the product. Now, the analogy that I like to use is baking a dessert. So when we start with baking, we start with our ingredients, and that's our content. So I might have sugar, I might have oil, I might have milk, chocolate, butter, eggs, and things like that. But based on who's going to be having the dessert, I may need to make some alterations. If I have someone who is watching cholesterol, I might substitute the oil and the eggs for bananas and applesauce. And if I have someone who's watching sugar, I might substitute sugar for stevia. Or if I have someone who's allergic to dairy, I might substitute the milk for almond milk. Those are all different ways that I can change the content, but I'm still teaching or baking the same thing. The next thing that teachers can differentiate is the process. So for my baking analogy, I'm mixing up all of my ingredients, but I can do it different ways. I can mix it up with a hand mixer, I can mix it with a whisk, I can use an old school egg beater, I can even use a giant KitchenAid mixer. And finally, teachers can differentiate the product. With our baking analogy, it might look like a chocolate cake. But there are other things I could make with those same ingredients and the same process. I can make cupcakes, I can make donuts or brownies or even chocolate waffles if I wanted to. So let's look a little bit more closely at each of those. We'll start with the content. When we're differentiating content, we start by targeting the Common Core state standards. Then we compose our essential questions. That is, what is it that our students have to know before moving on? Third, we highlight the knowledge, skills, and understandings that are necessary. And fourth, that's when we differentiate content based on their readiness. Teachers who differentiate their content use different genres. They use leveled materials. They provide a variety of instructional materials. They provide choices for students, and often they use selective abandonment when it comes to the curriculum. The key is that teachers who differentiate content will use a wide variety of materials and resources for the students to explore. I'd like you to click the pause button and go to the second Padlet link. There, I'd like you to write down at least 2 ideas that you have for differentiating your content. So now let's talk a little bit more specifically about process. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you to press pause, and in the instructions below, click on the link labeled Pyramid. That's going to take you to a Google Doc that has an image of a pyramid like this one. In that, I want you to try and rank the strategies listed on the pyramid from least effective, put those at the top of the pyramid, to most effective, and put those at the bottom. If you're feeling adventurous, try to guess the percentage of information that a typical student might retain for each of those strategies. Now, these process strategies listed are practice by doing, demonstrations, lectures, audio or visual, discussion, reading, and then teaching another person. How did you do? All right, so let's look at the top. The least effective strategy in terms of what students are likely to retain when you present new information is lecture. Generally, we expect students to retain about 5% of new content. Next is reading, that's about 10%. Audio and visual is about 20%. If we do a demonstration, we expect students to retain about 30% of the content. And if we do a discussion, about 50% of the content. Practice by doing leads to about 75% retention, and teaching another leads to about 90%. Now, the key is to remember that we need to differentiate based on our students and our content. We can't only do just one strategy, even if it looks like it's the most effective. We can't do it all the time. Sometimes we really do need to begin with a discussion or a lecture. That may be the most appropriate based on where your students are with their readiness levels and with your content. So I'd like you to click that pause button and go to the third Padlet. There, I'd like you to write down at least 2 ideas that you have for differentiating your process with some of your content. And finally, product. Now, when it comes to this third area of product, the key question is this: what do we want from students? And the answer is, we want them to understand. But how do we know when a student understands what we've taught? So click pause one more time and go to the fourth Padlet link. There, I want you to write down as many ways as you could think of that you could tell if a student understands the new content that you just taught. So a student who understands the content that you've just taught can do a couple of different things. They can explain it clearly, they can use it, they could give examples or pose a new problem that exemplifies or embodies the concept. They could relate it to other instances in the subject studies or other subjects or even personal life experiences. The student could transfer this new information to an unfamiliar setting or even discover the concept embedded within a novel problem. When a student understands what you've just taught, they may be able to create analogies or models, metaphors, symbols, or even design pictures that demonstrate the concept. They'll be able to pose what-if questions and answer those questions, or they can answer questions where you've altered the variables in a problematic situation. Students who understand can generate questions and hypotheses that lead to new knowledge and further inquiries. They can generalize from specifics to form a concept, and they can even use their new knowledge to appropriately assess their own performance or that of someone else's. So thinking about your content and the kinds of assignments that you've typically had your students do, I'd like you to press that pause button one more time and go to the Padlet and write down at least one thing that you could differentiate with regard to the product. Now, when it comes to products, we want to include powerful product assignments. And in order to do this, we have several steps. First, we have to identify the essentials of the study or the unit. Then, we develop a product assignment that is relevant, measurable, and observable. We can differentiate or modify versions of the assignment based on student readiness, interest, and their learning needs. We can decide on scaffolding that we need to build in order to promote success. This might be things like timelines or storyboards, offering critiques or revisions to the students, or other different strategies. Then we use that to coach for success. So in this micro PD, we've focused on learning vocabulary that's specific to the topic of differentiated instruction, the basic principles of differentiating the content, the process, and the product, and identifying different instructional strategies that support differentiation. So in the description below, I've included a link to an Edutopia blog about creating powerful products and several other short articles that give some really concrete examples of what this can look like in your classroom. Once you've read through those and reviewed some others' feedback on the Padlets, I'd like to invite you to take the post-assessment. It's a Google form, and once you reach 80% on the assessment, you'll receive a certificate in your email for 1.5 hours of professional development through this micro PD. I hope you've learned some new ways to improve your student experiences through differentiation.